David Josiah Brewer. David J. Brewer, who made his home in Leavenworth, Kansas, became the most accomplished jurist in the state's history. At the time Kansas became a state, Brewer was serving as a probate and criminal court judge in Leavenworth County. By the turn of the century, he was sitting as a well-respected associate justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Born in Izmir, Turkey, while his father was serving as a Congregational Church missionary, Brewer's uncles on his mother's side became very prominent Americans also. Stephen J. Field, a noted judge, served on the U.S. Supreme Court at the same time as his nephew. David Dudley Field became a very distinguished lawyer, and Cyrus Field played a key role in the laying of the transatlantic communications cable. Brewer grew up in New England, graduating with high honors from Yale University in 1856. He got his law degree from the well-known Albany School of Law in 1858 and became a member of the New York Bar. Brewer went west to seek his fortune in the Colorado gold fields, but he decided within a year to practice his profession in Leavenworth, which at the time was a major urban center between St. Louis, Missouri and San Francisco, California. The newly established state, which was growing rapidly in population and industry, particularly manufacturing and the railroads, was fertile ground for a capable young lawyer. Within a few years, Brewer decided to give up law practice, and for the remainder of his life, served as a judge at increasingly higher levels of responsibility within the state and nation. In 1864, Brewer was appointed as a judge in the 1st Judicial District of Kansas in Leavenworth. This district still exists in eastern Kansas today. He decided to run for county attorney in 1868 and served in this capacity until 1871. During his years in Leavenworth, Brewer became one of its most widely known and respected community leaders. He served on the Board of Education and helped in the establishment of a subscription library in the city. He was one of the charter members of the First Congregational Church in the city. At the age of 33, Brewer won election to the Kansas Supreme Court, and he won re-election to the highest bench in Kansas again in 1876 and 1882. Due to the quality of his judicial thinking, writing, and decisions, and the recommendations of members of the legal profession, President Chester A. Arthur appointed Brewer to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in 1884. President Benjamin Harrison appointed him to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1889. Many modern historians, influenced by their liberal orientation, and other critics without much understanding of the role of the legal profession in American history, have taken a very critical view of Brewer and his accomplishments. They accuse Brewer of being racist because he didn't advocate the social assimilation of the blacks. In that regard, he reflected the prevailing opinion of his time. Historians err by imposing values of the present in a self-righteous way on those of the past. Brewer has been charged with being a conservative stalwart who favored big business and the rights of property owners. In this respect, he was no different from the other great lawyers of his time. Anyone with knowledge of 19th century U.S. history can testify to the importance of these institutions in the daily life of the nation at that time. He did believe that government should interfere with the economy as little as possible. The fact is that Brewer was the first jurist of his stature to rule in favor of women's rights on several occasions, and for the rights of Oriental immigrants. At a time when women did not have the right to vote, Judge Brewer ruled in their favor when he defined their status in owning a family homestead and by protecting their assets as distinct from their husbands when they entered marriage with funds of their own or obtained them later. Brewer ruled once again in favor of women when he ruled in Muller v. Oregon, a 1908 case before the U.S. Supreme Court, that a state had the right to regulate how many hours a woman could be made to work per week to 60. Some constitutional historians believe this to be his most famous case. He accepted sociological and economic data to conclude that women's health and reproductive systems might be affected by overwork. Modern critics would say that he was acting as a liberal judge rather than a conservative one by using such information, which went far beyond a literal reading of the Constitution. It shows the danger of employing easy labels to define people and their impact. Another Brewer decision provides an insight into his judicial thinking. In State v. Mugler, Brewer, sitting on the Kansas Supreme Court at the time, ruled that Kansas could pass prohibition laws as a proper exercise of its state police powers. However, he ruled also that the state had to reimburse a brewer, no pun intended, for the loss of value of his alcohol manufacturing equipment that the state regulation had adversely affected. Throughout his judicial career, Brewer was sensitive to individual rights in the face of state regulation, and he consistently ruled that regulation of monopolies and the trusts that were beginning to dominate the U.S. economy was a proper function of government. Brewer ruled in favor of equitable treatment and residency status for Chinese immigrants on several occasions. He was an anti-colonialist who spoke out against U.S. occupation of Cuba and the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. America's power, Brewer believed, had more to do with its schools than the power of its armed forces. He headed a congressional commission that helped decide the boundary between the countries of Venezuela and British Guiana, which probably prevented Great Britain from going to war in South America. Brewer was one of the founders of the American Society of International Law, which promoted arbitration rather than the use of force in international disputes. Brewer was considered one of the finest legal minds of his generation, a personable man with great patience and ability to work with people. He died of a stroke at age 73 in 1910, while still serving on the U.S. Supreme Court. He is buried in Muncie Cemetery in Leavenworth, Kansas.